So with Hercules finally joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it comes as a surprise to many that Marvel even has a Hercules. Much like Thor, he's actually been around in the comics for some time now, even serving as an Avenger for years and more recently joining the Guardians of the Galaxy. And outside of the comics, he's undoubtedly a more well-known figure in pop culture than Thor. So if you want to know why Marvel's Hercules hasn't been as popular, you have to go back to when it all started. He made his first big appearance going head-to-head against Thor in 1965's Journey into Mystery Annual Number 1, at a time when Hercules had appeared in over 20 movies within a 5-year span, and historical epics like Ben-Hur, Spartacus, and Ten Commandments were reaching their peak popularity. It was actually American bodybuilder Steve Reeves' portrayal of Hercules in the late 50s that inspired Marvel's design for the character, and essentially kick-started the sword and sandal genre of Italian films in the 60s. And aside from appearing in the iconic Jason and the Argonauts, he was even in a Three Stooges movie in 1962. So when he was literally everywhere, it made sense as to why Marvel would want to use Hercules as well, although by the time he made his big debut, interest in the sword and sandal films had declined, leaving Marvel's Hercules in an awkward spot, where he kind of just stuck around. Since then, he's been portrayed in movies and television over the years by Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lou Ferrigno, Kevin Sorbo, Ryan Gosling, The Rock, that Twilight guy, and of course now Brett Goldstein. But his big moments in the comics were just as sporadic and have more or less been forgotten. There's also the animated series from the 60s and the Disney film from the 90s, which is not entirely faithful to the Hercules mythos, but is unfortunately how most modern audiences today are familiar with the character. Needless to say, Marvel's Hercules has pretty much the same powers and origin as he did in all those movies and TV shows, although over time aspects have been modified to fit the greater Marvel universe. He's the immortal bastard son of Zeus, has strength that matches the Hulk, dresses like it's 1399 BC, and usually carries his signature mace forged by Hephaestus. If anything, it may come as a disappointment that Marvel's version of the character isn't exactly the Disney-fied golden boy most would expect, which could be another reason Hercules has never been an A-lister in the comics, aside from playing second fiddle to Thor's space god adventures. And although he was born to be a champion for the human race and has always been adamant about doing the right thing, he'll also sleep with just about anyone, and he's long been portrayed as a reckless drunk, burdened with countless tragedies and some of the worst family drama. He's treated like a child by Zeus, endlessly being kicked out of Olympus. His stepmother Hera is always trying to kill him. His half-brother Ares is always jealous of him. And his half-sister Athena, who's usually one of the only Olympians to help Hercules, sometimes decides to screw him over too. Although he's well known for aiding warriors in battle and completing the infamous 12 labors, he's actually had pretty bad luck as a hero, seemingly making things worse every time he tries to do the right thing, even though that usually involves charging headfirst into a fight without hesitation. This has resulted in his adoptive father's death, his own exile from Olympus, a near fatal beatdown by the Masters of Evil, and at one point when he was with the Avengers, he thought he'd killed Kang the Conqueror, only to set a trap for the heroes and Kang's countless variants. On top of that, Hercules has a pretty bad track record of being manipulated or brainwashed into attacking the wrong people. He also has a pretty uncontrollable rage problem similar to the Hulk's, which resulted in the accidental death of his wife. Even though Hercules drank for most part in the celebratory fashion, it's no surprise that his habits eventually became more of an abusive method to deal with all of his problems. And in turn, it's not so surprising that this made it hard for him to retain strong relationships with other Marvel heroes. This was even brought up a lot when he was briefly with the Heroes for Hire. Throughout his run in the comics, Hercules was more of a character to relate to than one readers daydreamed of becoming by picking up a magic hammer, as he was this immortal being who seemingly had the same problems as common mortals. More or less, this has been the appeal to most Marvel heroes, but as for Hercules, he's never been able to escape being a secondary character long enough to have a lasting mark in Marvel history. Even when he had his longest running comic series, he was still a stand-in for the Hulk. The Incredible Hercules series by Greg Pak that followed the World War Hulk event was indeed his biggest moment in Marvel Comics, and eventually led to him obtaining enough power to rebuild the multiverse, and then subsequently losing that power and his immortality as well. Elements from this story would continue in the Pak's Herc series that followed the depowered Hercules, the Prince of Power, and the Totally Awesome Hulk series that followed Herc's super genius buddy Amadeus Cho, and his more recent Hercules miniseries that saw the repowered hero trying to finally turn a new leaf. He has since rejoined the Avengers, was featured in the No Surrender and No Road Home events, led a strike force with Quicksilver during the Secret Empire event, and more recently joined the Guardians of the Galaxy on one of the team's best ever lineups that also included Doctor Doom. Ideally, if you're wanting to pick up some Hercules comics, Greg Pak's 2008 Incredible Hercules series is a great place to start. The epic Chaos War event that follows it is probably as good as it gets for Hercules, as we basically see him become Marvel's Superman. His 2016 modernized Hercules series is awesome too, and continues into the Gods of War mini that sees him teaming up with Gilgamesh, Beowulf, and other mythological icons. Since Hercules has primarily been a secondary character up until this point, the majority of his earlier appearances can be found in comics like Thor, Avengers, Champions, Defenders, and some Incredible Hulk, and the occasional team-up or one-shot, and he has even come across the Eternals from time to time. However, my personal favorite Hercules comic is Bob Layton's alternate future space epic from the 80s, which has mostly been forgotten because it's technically not considered canon. But it was actually Marvel's first ever miniseries comic, along with the iconic Wolverine miniseries that released the same week in 1982, and that featured Hercules in the 24th century facing his son who'd become the evil ruler of the Andromeda Galaxy. There were two sequel comics in 1984 and 1988, and the conclusion series, Hercules Twilight of a God, was finally released in 2010 and saw Hercules decapitating Silver Surfer and combining with Galactus after sacrificing himself to form the new entity Cosmos. What I like most about this story is that it was essentially Marvel's first comic like Old Man Logan that saw an older version of the characters seemingly at the end of their journey. And even though it's irrelevant to the greater Marvel universe, it's the most creative Marvel's ever gotten with Hercules, so it's worth checking out to kind of get a glimpse of what could have been. That being said, it's not easy to speculate what he could end up doing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe if he sticks around for a while. For now, we can assume he'll show up in the sequel to Thor Love and Thunder, but there's also the chance we could see the events of the 1979 Celestial Saga comic adapted to the big screen in some fashion, where the Olympians, Asgardians, and the Eternals all go at it. Or maybe he could eventually become an Avenger, given Thor is elsewhere, since in the comics he was on the team a lot of times they faced Kang. You can also check out Hercules' brief appearances in animated shows like The Superhero Squad, Hulk and Agents of Smash, and Avengers Assemble. And if you're feeling adventurous, there's even that one time he was in the short-lived Marvel superhero show from 1966.